Hello everybody and welcome in. Today we're going to be recapping round number 6 of my tournament, Melbourne International Open. I went into this round undefeated with 3 wins, 1 draw and 1 bye, and I was super nervous when I saw my pairing because I was matched up against a 9-year-old kid who'd been having a heck of a tournament. He was only 1600 rated, but he'd just gone back-to-back wins against an 1800 and a 1900. But I have one thing going for me, that was I have the white pieces. So I was like, okay, let's not be too afraid. We'll just try and play solid and play a good game and hope I get the win. So I start off with e4 and he plays c5. This was not surprising to me as I actually found his online account before the game and I saw he played some Taimanov and some Khan Sicilian, which involves this e6 and a6 ideas, which is a little bit more solid as far as Sicilians go compared to a Dragon or a Naitov. I go knight to f3 and he plays e6. I play d4, just pushing in the center and planning to trade off these pawns and put a knight in the middle of the board. He then plays a6, and a6 is a solid move, and the idea is usually that they want to stop this knight coming into b5 and maybe also push b5 themselves and put a bishop on b7, because especially now that they've played this move where they sort of have this light square pawn chain on this side of the board, the bishop probably wants to come over to this square where it can have a little bit more scope rather than just staring at pawns. So he plays a6. And yeah, the reason why that the idea might be to play queen c7 is because if queen c7 is played now, I'm just going to attack your queen with knight b5 and force it to move back. I can come in and check and win the bishop pair very early in the game. So he plays a6 first. And then after knight c3, when I develop my knight, he plays queen to c7. And the queen is now on a nice active square and controlling a lot of squares in the middle of the board. And puts pressure on this knight over here on c3. I played g3, and this is something I've actually never played against the Khan over the board, but I just wanted to give it a try. I wanted to play something solid, and I usually have a lot of trouble against this Khan and Taimanov openings. Usually I'm playing this bishop d3 and trying to play castles normal and play rook e1. And I always somehow want to push f4, but I get into a lot of trouble against these openings. So I decided to play something a bit different, try and put the bishop on g2, castle early, and play a solid game. So here he plays knight to f6, pressuring my e4 pawn, and then I play bishop to g2, defending this again, and also preparing to castle. He brings his bishop out to b4, and though I didn't know a lot about this opening, I knew that he wasn't actually threatening to capture this knight on c3. If I do just castle here and he takes, it's actually big trouble for him, especially if he becomes greedy and decides to capture with the queen here, because now he has no dark square bishop to control any of these empty squares around the king. So I could play something like this and say if the knight is coming out, I've got plans to maybe even bring a bishop or the queen into d6 where the king can never castle, like something like this. Queen d6 or bishop d6, and we're controlling these squares here, and the king can never castle. So I castle, but my opponent knows his theory as well, and also castles. And here on move 8, I'm already not entirely sure what to do. So I thought about a few moves. I thought about knight a4 because I knew this is some idea to try and control some squares over here and stop this bishop or this queen coming to the b6 or c5 squares, and also create some ideas of pushing this pawn to c4 at some point and control the d5 square. But I thought, okay, let's just play something solid. I was thinking about it a while and I was like, I don't know if knight a4 is actually the move here, and it's a little bit of a strange move to play if it's wrong. You know, like what if they just play b5? What if they do something like that? Now, if they did play e5, if they did play b5, sorry, then I could just push forward like this with e5, creating an attack over on the rook. But anyway, at the time, I just wanted to play solid, so I play something quite inaccurate, and I put this bishop on d2. And the idea is that I just want to have this defended. If they take here, I'm just going to take back with the bishop. But the problem is now this knight becomes a little bit more weak. My queen was defending it, now it's not. And he plays knight to c6, and now he is threatening to capture. I decide here that I'm just going to play something a little bit sharp, and I play a3. I mean, it's not very sharp, but it's something that tests my opponent in terms of what they want to do. Now, if they take here, again, I'm happy as Larry with the two bishops controlling lots of squares. This is good for me. And, you know, if he captures here, I'm just going to take back with the bishop in a happy position again. But my opponent does the most responsible thing and moves the bishop away. And here I thought for a little while about what to do. I had some idea of maybe I could attack the bishop over here, but I thought at some point my opponent would bring this knight into the e5 square and start targeting my bishop, my pawn, all of these squares over here, and this would just be a really strong knight. So I decided, all right, let's just get rid of this knight before it becomes really annoying. So I just take, he takes back, and then I play knight to a4, finally attacking this bishop, making it move. Bishop goes all the way back to e7. And then I play c4. Main idea is just that my opponent really wants to play d5. They want to push forward in the center. Like if I play something like c3 instead, d5 can be quite annoying because after takes and takes, they have 2 pawns in the middle of the board and I have 0 pawns in the middle. So they're controlling the center nicely. So instead I play c4 because now d5 is a lot less scary. We just trade off and now I have an open c file for my rook. So instead my opponent plays d6, which is actually a move I didn't really consider, but it's quite good. Looking to maybe play c5 or e5 at some point and look at controlling the dark squares. Now, here I decided to go for the plan of e5. The best move, and something I looked at briefly but kind of didn't really think about for long enough, was c5. And if they're capturing, then what we're just going to do is pile all the pressure on this pawn, win back the pawn eventually, and then try and target the c6 pawn after this because it's now become sad and isolated. It has no pawns around it. Instead, my plan was, okay, I want to push e5 because I want to open up my bishop and I want to do the same idea where I'm splitting up the pawns in the middle, but it wasn't something I could do straight away. So, because if I play e5 now, they just capture, and after I bring the queen in to try and attack, the knight can just come to d7 and defend everything. So instead I play queen e2 and I want to play, that's the plan, I just want to play e5. Now the bishop comes to b7 and I play rook to e1. Again, just trying to push forward the idea of this and that I could just trade queens in the end if they capture. Here he plays a move, but yeah, here he plays a move that I didn't see and sort of allowed, well I did see it, but I kind of allowed this and I probably shouldn't have. So I allow him to play c5, and now this is a little bit annoying because this bishop becomes a lot stronger now. Before the bishop was stuck behind pawns, and it would be stuck behind pawns. If I had played c5 instead, an important difference would be that my opponent would have a little bit of trouble getting this bishop ever being opened up and being an active piece because it's stuck behind not 1 but 2 pawns in a row. But now in this scenario where I don't play c5, my opponent can, and now this bishop is more open. So here, I wanted to play e5, but I actually didn't like the look after takes and takes. My opponent has this idea of attacking my king and also the knight at the same time. So this is going to be a fork, and after the king moves, they take. Yes, I take over here, but after the bishop takes, this pawn on b2 is looking unhappy. They've got lots of pawns in the center, and I think I would actually have a really rough time playing this game. So I was thinking, okay, I want to play this, but I don't want this sort of scenario to happen. So I decide to play knight to c3, because now if I'm playing e5 and the bishops are traded off, they no longer have this idea of the check and taking the knight. The knight's not going to be under attack anymore. So my opponent now plays rook to b8, and they're thinking once this bishop moves, this pawn on b2 is going to be attacked. So I decide to just move my rook to b1 and defend it. He moves the bishop back to a8 and opens up his rook. And then I decide finally to play e5, and we just get a huge amount of trades here. And the position really simplifies. My rook looks kind of nice in the center, but after my opponent plays rook to d8, I unfortunately have nowhere to move this bishop that looks any good. Like if I go back to e1, this looks just a bit sad. It looks passive, you know? It doesn't look so fun to have this bishop on the very back of the board. My rook seems a little bit strange up here on e5 as well. And also if I go over here to e3, his knight can come in and attack my rook and my bishop at the same time. And so I just decided, okay, let's just go back and defend the bishop. So my opponent now plays rook to d3, and they've got a clear plan. They want to bring in 2 rooks and control the open file, which is very solid. But I've got another plan in mind. I want to attack this pawn, and I want to attack this pawn, and I want to win both of them, and then make 2 queens over here and win the game. But unfortunately, my opponent gets to make some moves too. So here first, I decide to go knight to a4, attacking this pawn and threatening to bring this bishop up to e3 and take this pawn. The reason why I didn't go bishop e3 first is because they can go knight g4, attacking me, and this would force my bishop to move away from where it can attack this pawn. So I go knight a4 first, they bring their rook in, and I play bishop e3 attacking the pawn. I was feeling pretty good. I was like, okay, we're going to be winning this pawn, I think. But then they play this nice move, knight to e4, and suddenly I realized that maybe it's not so simple. This knight is threatening to come into d2, attacking my rook and my pawn over here, threatening to win a pawn. This knight can also come up to f3, checking the king. The rooks are maybe going to start attacking me over here as well. So I decided, all right, let's try and play something solid and move the king up to g2. And this was basically just to move my king out of potential checks and attacks and get it off the back rank. They then play knight to d2, attacking my rook, and I decide here, okay, let's give up the c2 pawn and try and win these 2 pawns in... let's give up the c4 pawn, sorry, and try and win these 2 pawns in exchange. So I go rook d1, they take... I trade everything, and then I capture on c5. Now, my opponent probably should have just played something like king f8 and just defended here, but instead they take. And this gives me a little bit of, you know, something here because I'm attacking the rook and the pawn at the same time, although my opponent finds a nice way to defend. Like, if they go here and they try and defend, I have this nice move where I attack the knight, and if the knight is moving, I can just capture a pawn for free over here on a6 because otherwise you're getting back rank mated. But instead my opponent just plays rook to d2, and this is actually a nice move. Because after trades, after I am taking, they play knight to c4. And there's no way for me to defend both pawns at once. So in the end we just have 4 pawns versus 4. I probably should have just gone for this because it would end up with me having at least 1 pawn to try and push over here and see if I can make a queen. But instead, I decided I wanted to be a bit greedy and try and hold on to some pawns here. So I play b4 instead, trying to hold on to the pawn. And he plays knight to c4, attacking my pawn on a3, and I push forward, trying to keep holding on to the pawns. He plays a5, and this is again a nice move. It says, okay, now you're not taking my a6 pawn, basically. And then again, I want to be greedy again and hold on to the pawn. So a lot of inaccurate moves by me, just trying to hold on to all of my pawns. But I was trying to create the best winning advantage. Although maybe the best chance was just not to be so insistent on keeping these 2 pawns here. So instead I push forward, and the knight now comes to a nice square on b6 where it blockades my pawn, stops it from pushing forward, and now we can start just bringing the king in and sort of getting it in a nice position where it can defend everything. So we both bring our kings into the center, and then my opponent decides he's going to create some counterplay by pushing on this side of the board because he's got more pawns over here. Now I just want to say, if this knight is ever moving, he can just capture this pawn on a4, so that's why I'm not moving this knight. Then I play f4, stopping this e5 push. He plays h6, I play h4, and then he plays h5. We're just exchanging pawn moves. Now I decide to move back. And yes, the king can come forward, but now I'm going to play this check. And I capture the pawn. It does allow him to capture, but, you know, at some point I had to give up one of those pawns. I move over to the center so that he's not going to get counterplay with pushing forward here and trying to create a pass pawn down here on the e-file. And then he starts trying to win my pawn. I give a check because if he captures, there's going to be a nice fork on the king and this pawn on e6, and I can maybe take it. Instead, my opponent doesn't take, and I play knight to d4 anyway, attacking the pawn on e6. Check, and my king moves over. And I sort of just shuffle the king over. I did miss, again, some idea of playing f5. This would have been a nice move to find, because if they push forward, I'm going to play knight e6 and take this pawn on the next move. And if they try and trade, I'm making a queen over here. So I did miss this idea. And again, if takes, I'm attacking this. Just a slight advantage for white, but still playing for a bit more than just shuffling the king. So I shuffle the king back and forth a bit, and then he plays g6, pushing forward. I shuffle again. Now he plays e5, pushing forward. Now this creates a little bit of a weakness to target, so I attack it with my knight. He checks me, and now I move behind the pawn. And he takes. And here, there is a very important moment, because here I am actually winning, but only with one move. And I was deciding between this move and one other move for a while. I was deciding between knight e7 and knight e5 for quite a while, but I just couldn't find the difference between them. At this point, we're around 3 hours into the game, so we're getting a little bit tired here. But there's no excuse for why I missed this. Now, if this knight comes to e5, well, let's show what I did play first. I did play knight to e7. And my idea is just to go and pick up all the pawns on this side. But now my opponent has this nice idea to bring in the king and defend everything from the center. So now the king comes in and walks over to these pawns, and he's actually managing to hold this, because I can't really make any progress. This knight can even sacrifice itself for a couple of pawns if it needs to. And yeah, my opponent just defended really, really well. We played on for a few moves more after this. I shuffled my knight around, but it really wasn't, you know, it really wasn't exciting, so I didn't go on from here. We just were shuffling. But my opponent defended super well. Now I'll quickly show the winning line. If instead I played knight to e5, the big difference is my opponent no longer has this idea of coming to c4 and then d5, because my knight controls the square. And this is actually a zugzwang almost, because he can't push this pawn, because I'm going to take it if so. And this knight can't go anywhere, because I'm going to take on e4 if it moves. And wherever the king goes, it's sort of getting further away from the action. And then now when I take, my knight is just a little bit faster, because now it stops him again from getting in, controlling this square around here, and stopping him from defending. So now the king has to move over to d6, and I can play a nice move, king to d4, stopping this king from coming into e5. And again, this knight can't move. I'm just going to take on e4. Like if they go here, I'm just going to take over here. This is definitely going to be winning. And if they do anything else, I can just take this pawn and start trying to promote over here. So this was a little bit of a missed opportunity, although my opponent played super well overall. I think I was really trying to push hard to win without calculating enough to actually make the win possible. Because I think, as you might notice, I didn't play very ambitiously. I played kind of solid, boring, and I didn't really go very aggressive. It was the second game of the day, so I think we were both a little bit tired. The second game of the day, you're usually just feeling a little less sharp, a little less up to chess, especially if you're not as experienced. But my opponent played super well. It was a really fun game, and still going into round 7, I was undefeated, so that was very exciting. I did say I would stop there, but I just wanted to share a quick moment from the end of the game, which was kind of hilarious to me. So we got to around this position. Now, I did say that we were shuffling around the knights for a while, so I was shuffling for a while, and then after a bit, I was like, okay, I'm probably not going to win this at all. My opponent's defending really well, so I'll try one last thing. I sacked my knight for the remaining pawn, and decided to just see if I could, you know, push the pawns and try and make a queen. And we got to a position like this, and I realized, okay, well, there's absolutely no way I'm winning anymore. None of my pawns can promote, the knight's defending everything, and the king is defending everything. So yeah, we reached this position, and at this point, I decide to offer my opponent a draw. And he looks at me for a moment, and kind of thinks, he's like, no, I want to checkmate you, and gives me like the evilest grin, because I know that maybe you guys would have seen this too in some endgame puzzles where the king gets boxed in by his own pawns as white. And yeah, so my opponent, I love the moment that he was like, no, I want to checkmate you. He didn't even lie to me. He just wanted to win at any cost. But no, after a while, we ended up just trading off everything, and then we had a draw in the end. But I just thought it was hilarious that my opponent just said to my face over the board when I said, do you want a draw? He's like, no, I want to checkmate you with just the knight. But thankfully I did not get checkmated with only the knight, because that would be a very unfortunate way to have my tournament go. But anyway, thanks guys, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.